welcome to Mind, Money, Balance, the no guilt, no shame podcast to help you get your mind and money in balance. I'm your host, Lindsay. I'm a financial therapist and coach, woman of color, and popcorn connoisseur. I am so glad you're here. Let's go. What a wild week. I am recording this on Friday, January 8th, and I'm based in the United States. And so I think before we dive into things today and this week, it's important just to acknowledge what happened on Wednesday here in the States. And also just to share with folks, particularly folks who are small business owners, who are therapists, the importance of having an opinion and simultaneously sharing your opinion. During these times, I think it's so important that we let our clients know where we stand on certain issues. You know, Inclusive Therapists, which is a directory that I'm on or listed on, they shared that, quote, if you are not consistently assessing and treating conditions of white entitlement, apathy or denial, the symptoms of colonialism and white supremacy, rethink your career, unquote. And that's what they wrote to their therapists. And I couldn't agree more. And I think it's so important to let your clients know where you stand. Now, that does not mean you need to disclose how you voted. It doesn't mean you need to share your opinion on various political happenings. But you better believe that every client that I saw last week, with the magic of editing and recording, I asked them if they wanted to talk about what had happened at the Capitol. I checked in with how they were doing. Some of them absolutely wanted to dive into it. Some of them were like, I can't even think about talking about it anymore. But here's why I think it's important to share your opinion. Because people are watching you, they are listening to you, and they are understanding who you are and what type of therapist you are by the things that you do and do not say. I have been on Instagram for a couple of years now, and hands down, the most popular post is one that I posted yesterday. So again, by the time you're listening to this, it's been a few days. It was short, to the point, not on brand with my colors, probably were typos when I originally posted it, but I just want to read it to you and share with you that this was, at the time of this recording, seen by over 6,000 people, saved 36 times, shared 52 times, liked 371 times, and people visited my profile 164 times. This is why your voice matters as a therapist and why it's important for you to speak up and to stand out, especially when issues of safety, erasure are on the line. So this is what I said, short and sweet, nothing incredibly prolific or profound, but this is why you need to be speaking up and speaking your voice. So this is what I wrote. Here we go. Waking up on January 7th, 2021, as an American citizen, I couldn't have fathomed I'd be thinking, I hope today isn't another coup attempt, but perhaps I should have. Last night, I was overwhelmed by anger, embarrassment, rage, and all the other emotions rooted in fear. After many conversations and channeling my inner Ted Lasso, I started to move forward toward holding space for two competing things. Because let's remember that yesterday morning, we were celebrating a Black man and a Jewish son of immigrants being elected in Georgia. And so today, with the help of my friends, I am moving into this. Joy is resistance. Thriving is resistance. Rest is resistance. Resilience is resistance. And financial wellness is resistance. Whatever you need to do today, call in sick, rest, doom scroll, move your body, sob, write, work to distract yourself. Do it. Take it. And don't let anyone else tell you how to cope with a coup attempt. You are not overreacting. Sending extra hugs, peace, and moments of joy to my Jewish, Black, Indigenous, and Brown family. That was it. That was the post. Like I said, fairly short, nothing overly intense, but important for people to know where I stand and what I believe. And I want for you therapists listening to this who have a very generic about you statement to take a look at if I'm a client who is Black, Brown, Indigenous, Jewish, non-Christian. If I was to look at your page, your About Me page, would I know that you would be able to safely hold space for me? And if the answer is no, then you need to update your About Me page or you need to be crystal clear about why you're in the field of therapy. Like I said, I told you when I started recording today, I needed to address what was going on and why it's so important as therapists that we have opinions. Because unfortunately, here in the United States, healthcare is politicized. Mental health care is politicized. And you better believe that personal finances are political. All right, big exhale with me. Whew. Let's move into this week. This week, I have two guests on today who are both came into my world through the world of publishing my book. Today's guest, Dr. Shainna Ali, has also published her book through the same publishing house as me, Ulysses Press. And Thursday's guest, Dr. Devin Price, their book will be distributed by Simon & Schuster, which is who my book is distributed by. So I'm really, really excited to have on these folks to talk about things that I think are extra important as we talk about money, because their books are about self-love and the idea that laziness does not exist. And if we need anything this week, it is the reminder that we need to take care of ourselves. It is one of the best acts of resistance. It's one of the best acts of self-preservation. And it is a way for us to show up in our community wholly, fully, safely. And that, my friends, right now is radical. So let's get into some self-love. And then later this week, we will get into the idea that laziness does not exist. So as I mentioned, Dr. Shainna Ali and I met through our book publisher, Ulysses Press. She wrote the book, the Self-Love Workbook and the Self-Love Workbook for Teens. And she will soon be coming out with a new book for children called Luna Finds Love Everywhere. Dr. Shainna is a mental health counselor, educator, and advocate who is passionate about destigmatizing mental health counseling and helping individuals worldwide recognize the importance of taking care of their mental wellness. She owns and operates integrated counseling solutions in downtown Orlando, which is a strengths-based clinical mental health and consulting practice. In addition to being an author, she also loves teaching future counselors and serves as affiliate faculty at Northwestern University. I am so excited for y'all to meet her. Let's get into it. Welcome to the Mind Money Balance podcast, Dr. Shainna Ali. I'm so happy to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to chat with you.
Yeah. So I mentioned in the intro how you and I connected. We have a book publisher who is the same. And I would love to share with the listeners what your books are about. And then we will get into a little bit more about you.
Yeah, thank you for that opportunity. So I have authored the Self-Love Workbook and the Self-Love Workbook for Teens, and we do have an exciting project coming out next year. But generally, this came from my personal journey in trying to develop my own mental wellness. I realized that a cornerstone of that process was self-love. And while I had kind of understood what that meant, I realized that in my journey, I struggled with like a practical method of how to infuse self-love into my life. And the further I got in my practice and also in my doctoral degree, I realized, wow, lots of other people probably have this as a cornerstone, but don't know how. So that was pretty much where it came from. And I'm really lucky to have authored both.
Yeah. And it's so interesting. Anytime I talk to an author or even a person who has created a course or a program of some sort, oftentimes, but not always, we are the person who went through it first. Like we write these things for ourselves because we've experienced them. I know for me, I experienced a ton of financial anxiety, which is why my book, The Financial Anxiety Solution, was so fun to write because I'd been on the other side of it. So for those of the listeners who don't know you, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are professionally, but also kind of what's happening in your life personally and for fun?
Sure. So I'm Dr. Shainna, as you have heard. I am a mental health clinician, counselor, educator, and mental health advocate. So I started out because of my personal journey with mental health and anxiety management. I realized how passionate I was about mental wellness at large, and that kind of pulled me to the field. And then I saw some really discouraging gaps in the field, especially when it came to identity and culture, gender and sexuality. And that caused me to really want to contribute to filling those voids. And that's when I pursued my doctoral degree in counselor education. And then after that, I thought I was just going to go straight off to academia and that was it. It's cut and dry. But by that time, I had evolved in my perspective of what mental health awareness and what mental health education looked like. And while I really love teaching graduate students who are about to be counselors, sometimes I feel like I'm preaching to the choir. These are already folks that believe that mental health awareness is important. And I realize that if we really want to stand up against the stigma that's worldwide, we have to raise mental health awareness on a global level, for everybody. So that's been my passion as of late. And I've been doing that in a variety of ways. So of course I incorporate that into my personal practice, making sure I practice what I preach. I don't just see clients. I make sure I'm a client myself. Serving on the Mental Health Association of Central Florida Board of Directors has been a wonderful opportunity. And even just really similar to you, trying to make sure that I publish material that gets out there with courses, anything really, to make sure that this information can be shared, because I believe that mental health accessibility is so important.
Thank you. I love that. And what are you doing for fun, for joy in this wild
fun.
year?
Oh, yeah. So, fun exists, huh? Yeah. So actually, in terms, I mentioned practice what I preach in terms of mental health, and self-care is a big part of my self-love journey. I take it so seriously that I forget it's for fun because it's such a daily part of my life. But yeah, that is really enjoyable. I believe in the different components of well-being. So every area of my wellness, I have something that's enjoyable and fun for me. So whether it is a physical area of wellness, and that might be dancing or yoga, whether it's mental health, and that may be using my own book, going to therapy, making sure I have encouraging conversations with other folks in my support system, also just laid back, connecting with nature. My favorite way to do that is puppy time. I mean, isn't that just the best way ever? Dogs are the best. And, right now I'm dealing with a big change in my life as well, because we are expecting our first child. So in just a few months, I will add the title of human mom to the list of the different pieces that make up who I am.
Oh, and I love how you said, look, I have to read my own book sometimes and remind myself of what self-love is. Again, even though we are mental health care professionals, it doesn't mean we just intuitively do all of these things. We have to put them in our calendars, on our schedule, and make it a part of our routine. And what I heard for you is it's been a part of your routine for so long that it no longer feels out of the ordinary. It just feels like, brushing your teeth is like going and playing fetch with your dog, or taking, an online Zoom dance class. All of those things are so important to our mental health care. So when it comes to financial self-care, can you tell us a little bit about your money story, what money looked like to you growing up and how it shows up for you now as an adult in a therapy practice?
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate this question because I don't think I had thought about that much before about my specific financial story. Of course, I have covered a little bit about family history, especially in my own therapy, but in my personal reflection. And I've thought about how, the core beliefs and values of my family have affected who I am. But this question really helps me to zoom into that financial aspect. So I truly appreciate that. I think I was kind of raised with this notion that finances were easy and simple. And I don't think that's the case. I mean, I think we can get to that place that it's there, but it's not as simple as it looks. It's not as simple as you go to work, you earn your paycheck, you pay your bills, and that's that. And I'm sure I could go on and on for the rest of our time on all the variables, but for me, from a cultural standpoint, there are some, notions with money that we don't even realize kind of inhibit that process. The notion of what's to be celebrated versus saved. And why is there even this distinction between celebration and saving? That notion as well. And I have to say, a lot of my personal finance journey, because my career started early on in my life, it's really difficult for me to make the distinction between like personal finances and business finances,
Mm-hmm.
which is unique. I think a lot of times people may have their financial things first and then develop more of their business aspect. Not for everyone, but that is definitely my path. So that, I think that's where I noticed it the most, was that all of these money concepts and values and obstacles were absolutely showing up in my business.
Mm-hmm. And are you comfortable sharing with us what some of those roadblocks or obstacles in your business were when it came to money?
I sure am. So I think the big way to kind of categorize a few of these obstacles put together is just knowing my worth. And I got to tell you, I just raised my rates and
I saw that. I was so proud of you.
Thank you. And I still had, it was definitely less anxiety than when I have experienced this before.
Mm-hmm.
I'm in my 5th year of practice for reference, but it still makes me feel that way. So starting in the beginning, I had more of like my imposter syndrome that I had in terms of my personal mental health and professionalism. I mean, finances was just another category to experience that,
Sure.
Who am I to charge this and why? And I found it ironic that, self-love became a niche area of my practice because it totally applies here. So it's one of, again, practice what you preach, practice what you preach. I realized like, how can I get others to see their pure worth if I am also having these obstacles myself? And I realized how important it was to address that. And in looking at what are the things that stood in my way to make me, question my worth when it came to finances and my private practice, there's definitely the imposter syndrome that I noted, but also this struggle with wanting mental health care to be accessible. So I would feel this burden of, looking at all the providers in my area, what they're charging, and thinking about, even just my loved ones and who needed mental health care in addition to myself, and just like, who can actually afford this and how, the insurance obstacles in that, or even if you're paying out of pocket, like how is it possible to get the quality of care that you need, especially if it's long-term care, and afford that? That really gave me a huge struggle. If I'm out here saying that I believe that mental health care needs to be accessible, how can I contribute to raising rates that may be aligned with my worth? Sure, but then becomes more of like a community systemic issue, and it's misaligned with what I believe in terms of accessible mental health care. That was a huge struggle. And like I mentioned, it is still a difficult balance for me, but I have gotten much better at recognizing my pure worth as it is, but also the things that I have worked for that contribute to what a session fee costs, right? So whether that's the degrees that I've, been really fortunate to have now, have earned, or, whether it is my rent, like I have to think about all these things. I was just thinking about it as the price tag, and I wasn't thinking about everything that went into it. I was definitely leading more with a therapist heart than a business heart. And I hate that they even had to be distinct in that way. I found this to be particularly triggered when I knew that I was leading with heart, but I wasn't sure if this was received with heart.
Oh, interesting.
So I think about, I have a very distinct memory of being in my first year of practice because my rates were really, really fair. Let's just say that. Let's say they were really fair. And I also had hardship sliding scale rates for folks in need. And it felt good to do this. So it felt like the right thing to do. However, I would notice that a trend that started to happen with a few of my clients were they were not paying on time. They were missing payments, avoiding that conversation about missing payment. And I was really confused about all these things because I thought I had made it super accessible to, hey, if you can't pay your payment this week, once you let me in that session, I will work with you. I will be there for you. I will be an advocate for you. But you just have to let me know, right? Things like that. And even the further extreme of just seeing some of my clients come decked out that it doesn't look like they're going to a therapy session. It might look like they're going to a fancy dinner or something.
Sure.
Hair, nails, fancy clothes, designer items. And I'm thinking, wow, I'm really trying to crunch my numbers here to make this accessible to you. But are you seeing the value of not only myself, but this service in general? And then I realized that was when it really caught me, because I realized I was doing them a disservice by allowing them to kind of skirt around, not talk about these, and just assume, well, it's because they're having a hard time paying for it. So it's been a work in progress. I absolutely think it is still a work in progress. It's hard for me to imagine ever raising my rates and not having a little anxiety about it. But I'm really happy that I did it now. I skipped the entire 2020 of raising rates because I felt like that's where my heart was at with the pandemic. But it's time, and I'm happy that I did it.
Yeah, your story sounds so familiar. So many therapists think that the only way to be accessible to a client is to have really low rates. And I feel it. I've been there. I have wrestled with raising my rates. To your point, I think if we get to the point where we're just like raising our rates and not thinking about it, is it disconnected from our work? I think we do have to be intentional about the when and why and how we raise them. But this idea that if I only charge $30 per session or $50 per session, then somehow I'm a better therapist or I'm more accessible to my clients, takes away this idea that accessibility is multifaceted, right? To your point earlier, Shainna, is you are being culturally appropriate by plugging a hole by being a woman of color in the field, right? It's still a field that is mostly dominated by white folks, largely dominated by women. So we have a huge need to fill that gap and provide services for marginalized communities. So having cultural appropriateness, cultural representation, that is accessibility. Having the ability to do therapy over telehealth, that is accessibility. Having an office if it's physical, having it ADA accessible, that's accessibility. There are so many other ways to make therapy accessible outside of just our fees. So I love that you kind of saw it reflected in your clients. Were like, okay, I have to do my own work. So you identify on your Instagram as Guyanese. How do you think that plays into your practice and or your relationship with money?
Great question. So I think that, that would probably look different for lots of Guyanese folks. However, being a child of immigrants, I think that is something that lots of folks will understand,
Yes.
Country aside. And for most of my life, and I think this definitely affected a lot of my recovering perfectionism and anxiety management to this day, is, the notion of what has been sacrificed before I was even born.
Oh, yes.
That is a heavy weight that I've carried with me. And in many ways, it has been a motivational force, right? This is great. I'm doing this not only for myself, but I'm doing it for my loved ones. It can be really empowering on one hand. But on the other hand, it's really inundating. And especially in times when you're trying to find wellness, the idea of holding this pressure can be a lot. So I think that there's that of, not even making money, but success at large felt like it was a responsibility to my parents, to my family, to my community. I think that I have, and probably success comes out because I think I've tried to reframe what that means, right? So putting on my profile that I'm Guyanese, so it's obvious to the person who is, Guyanese and trying to really find their first provider and say, whoa, a provider exists. Or a student who thinks that they're potentially the first West Indian American who's becoming a therapist. And I'm like, whoa, someone else is this too. I think that representation kind of speaks to what you mentioned, and I appreciate you mentioning about accessibility. Connection, awareness, those are things that don't cost anything per se, but have a high value. And that has been really helpful for me to think about accessibility in that way, even social media in general, right?
Oh, yeah.
I know you do this too. There is so much totally free content that's placed out there. And that is accessibility, right? Totally different from therapy, but it is a subsect of that. So having that, or, when I teach, I don't teach any larger courses, but when I teach more of like my one-off workshops, trying to come up with a way that that is more accessible in the case
Right.
that my therapy session would not be accessible in terms of finances, but even because of state by state laws, right? For who can
Right.
see me in counseling as well.
Right. Oh, well, thank you for sharing that. And I do the same thing. I put out there that I'm biracial, I'm half Filipina, and I'm half white because I do think it's so important to have, that representation there. And I don't want anybody guessing, on my page, you
Mm.
know. I think it's a really important part of who I am. And, so much of the training we got in therapy that I'm sure you'll resonate with is this idea of like, don't disclose anything. But it's pretty obvious if you walk into a room with you or I that we're not white. So it's like, how are we not supposed to disclose our cultural background if it's pretty
Yeah.
obvious that we aren't, in that same bucket as so many folks?
It's such a dated notion, Lindsay, and especially
Yes.
being, in counselor education. So I'm constantly feeling like I'm bridging the way that I was trained. And then you think the way you were trained is the way you're supposed to train, right?
Right.
And
Right.
also, we are in a wave of, I think, authenticity. And that is such a saving grace when it comes to mental health on a personal and community level, is folks being willing to say this. So I think I resonate with you very much when you mentioned how much it is important to you to show what your ethnicity is, what your background is, the different roles you are, even recently, in becoming pregnant, it was important for me to share that with folks so they understand like, this is a change of life that I'm going through because I am a human who goes through change of lives just like you do, right? Because there was this pedestal type approach that I think we were trained in as like, you are to be neutral and to not reflect anything onto your clients. And while I don't think it's appropriate for when sometimes clients come to me solely because they resonate with something, right? You seem to be within the same age group. You're a millennial like I am, or, you're Guyanese like I am. I always make sure I have this conversation that, that link is really helpful, powerful, and in many ways beautiful. But what is it that you're coming to therapy for, to make sure that that link is not just leading us astray, that there is an important establishment of where we have connection, that it's beyond those points as well. But yeah, I'm super against the therapist as like, I don't know, the sitting brain, and, you don't have feelings. You're not allowed to have political views. Now,
Right.
I agree we should have healthy boundaries, but I think my clients are able to establish better rapport with me because I'm able to show who I am.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I think it's so important and so powerful. And again, as clinicians, we know when it's appropriate to disclose and to not disclose, and to make sure that it is for the therapeutic relationship. And again, research shows one of the best predictors of positive therapy, positive outcomes, is the fit between the therapist and the client, right? We can have all the credentials in the world behind our name, but if we don't click with the person sitting across from us, we aren't going to make progress. So I really appreciate that. So coming back to the money piece, what would you say you're proud of in terms of your current relationship with money?
I think that I am proud of recognizing that my anxiety can affect any area of my life. So therefore, it can affect finances, and therefore it can affect my business.
Right.
So putting that all together, it's not like, oh, I'm doing that work over there, so great, it's in check. It's also just making the space for like, where am I triggered with finances in my business, right? So allowing myself to look at it has been really helpful. It might seem like such a small moment of consciousness raising, but, even just like I mentioned to you with my rates recently, just acknowledging this makes me anxious, and then kind of saying to myself, of course it does, right? For all the reasons you mentioned, right? But then I can look at that feeling, I can sit with that feeling, I can explore it, I can make sure that I'm tending to it in a way that is authentic to me and that is most effective for my clients, instead of being intimidated by it. It's like, I was not trained, how to run a therapy practice. I wasn't. I wish we taught that more in, side note, in counseling grad school. I think there should be some sort of like workshop or something.
Couldn't agree more.
But even if that, honestly, Lindsay, what's really funny is my undergraduate major at first was business. I don't
Oh,
know
wow.
what I was. I don't know really why, because I was going to go into law at the time. I was told just do a general degree, and I'm like, okay. Hated my business classes. Go figure. But at that time, I had written it off as okay. You hate those business classes. That field is not for you. Go the other direction. And I did. But truthfully, the fact that I hated that was probably out of a lot of my own fear and misunderstanding about money. Right.
Yeah.
So it was really scary for me. I still don't think that, the business degree would have been better for me than the therapy degree at the end of the day.
Right.
But I realized that a lot of what happened at that time was like, I don't know this. If I was in a science class, that felt familiar. If I was in a pure old math class, it felt familiar. In a business class, that felt like a new language.
Right. Right. Yeah. And so what I heard there is in terms of getting comfortable with your money, it was about acknowledging, oh, hey, this is anxiety. I know how to cope with anxiety. Oh, hey, this feels a little bit like imposter syndrome. I know how to cope with imposter syndrome. And so just applying those skills that you had in other areas of your life and applying them to money. I love that advice. And I feel like that's so much of the work that I do is say, look, we have these skills. It's just about applying them to our relationship with money. Any tips, tools, podcasts you particularly love when it comes to your money stuff?
So, I think I am boring when it comes to my money management. I think there's nothing I would say that would surprise someone in this seat. I love my apps of like Square and QuickBooks. They help me so much. I think those are boring. But, because I've allowed myself to bridge this gap between seeing my mental health and how it pervades into every area of my life. So my business is not an exception in that way. I have started to incorporate finances and business into self-love as well. And that has been really helpful for especially this phase of life that I'm going through, changing, kind of preparing for maternity leave and realizing like, some people are really 100% excited to have 3+ months off from work. And I'm scared about it. Right. and I'm thinking, well, what is that? And I'm like, I know that like a baby's new and those fears are normal. It doesn't feel like that's what I'm scared of. I'm scared of what happens to my business. Right. And again, if I create the space to let myself do that, it allows me to then give myself the love I need in that area too. So ironically, incorporating those 10 segments of self-love, awareness, exploration, care, kindness, esteem, growth, and respect, I've now fused that into how I handle both finances, business and therapy all together.
Oh my gosh. I love that. What a very thought out answer. So from the practical of use Square, use QuickBooks to the practical of pulling from the 7, steps towards self-love from your book. I love how there's nothing wrong with practicality, right? You were like, it's kind of boring, but I'm like, but it works. If it's working, if it ain't broke, right? So before we leave, 1, where can people find you? And 2, is there anything going on in your world that you want listeners to know about?
So I think the easiest way for folks to find me would be on Instagram. So you can find me at Dr. Shainna there. That also links to my blog, which is one of the ways that I tried to find accessible mental health. That's how I've tried to kind of bridge that gap. My blog is A Modern Mentality, and it's hosted by Psychology Today. You can also find information on my page about the workbooks, so the self-love workbook in general, and then the specific teen edition as well.
Yay. Well, I will make sure to point everybody there in the show notes. Dr. Shainna Ali, I'm so glad to be connected. And thank you again for coming on.
Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate this combo.
Of course. This week's takeaways. The first one is this idea of how our family impacts the way in which we view our money and our careers. Dr. Shainna shared the struggle that she had of having the pressure of her parents say things like, you don't know what we sacrificed, or you don't know what we had to put up with or go through in order to get you here. And how hearing messages like that can stunt us in various ways when it comes to our relationship with money, which is why it's so important to work on our respective money stories, to rewrite the ones that are not working for us, to dig into the ones that are rooted in things that are harmful, and make sure that we are writing a story in our relationship with money that is in alignment with us and with our values, and also acknowledging that like the way that our family talks to us about things is absolutely going to impact us, and giving yourself a little break if you are finding yourself frustrated when you're engaging with your money, if you've got some of these old narratives in your head. The second takeaway is what she talks about, right? She wrote the book literally on self-love, which is about self-esteem and self-confidence and self-worth, and the importance of having self-confidence and self-love as a way to check in and push back against that imposter syndrome if and when it comes up, especially when you're working with your money. Let's be clear, you know that imposter syndrome is going to bubble on up. So practicing different ways to take care of your self-worth, self-esteem by practicing self-love, all of that can help so that when you get into spaces where you are negotiating your salary or you are working on increasing your fees, if you're a therapist in private practice, you have the comfort and confidence intuitively inside of you so that you can negotiate for those things and navigate the world of money with confidence. And the third takeaway is this idea of dated notions. And Shainna and I talked about this when we were talking about therapy, and this idea of don't disclose things about yourself, and how, she was saying, look, these things are so dated. And she shares her cultural background with her clients. When she got pregnant, she shared with her clients, hey, by the way, I'm pregnant. And she teaches this to her counseling students, the importance of therapeutic disclosure and how we have to really be careful about what are dated notions. And I talked about this at the top of the episode. This idea that we as therapists are supposed to be these neutral beings is really harmful, especially in the wake of blatant white supremacy that was happening earlier this week, or last week again, now that we're listening to it on Monday. And I think, how does this apply with money? Right? Because I'm getting on a tangent. I'm going to reel myself in. What are your dated notions about money? How are they harming you? And what can you do to reframe them, to rework them so that you don't have to hold on to things that don't work for you? Are you holding on to this idea that there's this rigid rule that you have to save 20% of your income? Maybe that worked for you 5 years ago, but now you're at a different point in your life and you need to increase or decrease that savings, and being so rigid no longer works for you. Maybe you had this idea that in order to be quote unquote good with money, you had to buy a house, but now you're a certain age and you're like, actually, I don't want to buy a house, but it's really hard for me to let go of that idea of that vague American dream that home ownership means that you've made it with your money. What are the dated notions that you are holding on to, and which ones are you willing to let go of? And with that, it is a wrap. I will see you here on Thursday with Dr. Devin Price. We are going to be talking about their new book, Laziness Does Not Exist, and about so much fun stuff when it comes to money. I'll see you then. If you love this episode, take a screenshot and tag me on Instagram at MindMoneyBalance with your favorite takeaway. I love seeing what resonates with my listeners and sharing it in my stories. Thanks so much for tuning in. I'll see you next week right here. Neither the host or guests are rendering legal, accounting, clinical, medical, or other professional information. If you want professional help, please seek it out.